Welcome, everyone. My name's Karen Charles, coming to you from sunny Vermont. We're having a beautiful day here. No storms, so everything should be good. Today, we have a lot of information to share with you, and this applies to any machine. It doesn't matter what brand of machine you have. A lot of what we're going to talk about today is really going to help you learn more about your machine, how to use tension, what tension really means. And then we're going to talk a little bit about our active stitch technology that we have on many of our PFAFF machines. But no matter what machine you have, whether it's a mechanical or whether it is an automatic tension, I promise you, you're all going to learn a lot. Now, we're going to start by talking about how you can recognize where your tension is and what the tension is actually doing. And then we're going to talk about how you can use it. Because like all of our machines that have automatic tension does not mean that you should never touch it. It means that when you touch and select a stitch and you make the change, it will automatically go back the way it was when you select another stitch. So, and I promise you very clearly, I want you all to know this, that if there was a reason why they didn't want you to touch the buttons for changing the tension, they wouldn't have put those buttons on the screen for you to be able to adjust. So we're going to go and look at our machine. Today I have the Creative Icon 2 up, and then behind me over my shoulder I have the 950, and we're going to use those to look at the screen because they are very clearly marked what everything is. But whether you have an ambition or a quilt expression, we're going to talk about making changes and using the tension on any of those machines. So, and Amy is here in the background. She's going to come on. If you have any questions you'd like to answer, let her know and make a comment about what your questions are. And Amy and I are going to talk about them and try and answer all the questions that we can. So I'm going to switch our screen over to our, and it's dark right now, so don't worry, we'll just get this touched like this, okay? So right now, this is our screen, and my sewing stitch is a straight stitch. And if you look down here on the bottom, and I'll zoom in a little bit, all right. So here we have our stitch length, and then we have our tension, and then this is the needle position. So depending upon whether or not, let me see if we can just see it like this a little better. Depending upon any reason you have to change needle position, on many of our machines, we have 37 needle positions. This is the stitch length, and this is the tension. And on our machines that we have, like the Creative Icon, Icon 2, and the Creative Sensation Pro, you might have to open up this button. I opened up Edit Stitch, and that's how I see all of that information. And that's true on most of our PFAFF machines that have this type of screen. On the 950, it comes up automatically, so you don't even have to do that. Now, the only thing that is not showing on the screen is how much press foot pressure is on our foot. And for that, you would go up to the settings. But I want to tell you some reasons why you might need to make a change and how you would change it. So if I go to a stitch that has a satin stitch, let me come over here and I'm going to choose, let me see if I go in here into a decorative stitch, and I'm going to choose this one right here. All right. So when you look at this stitch, and I'll close that window up so you can see the stitch a little bit better. When you look at that stitch, this is not the only way to use it. It comes up in the most likely way that you want to use it, but a lot of changes can be made. Right now, here is our stitch length. The width of this stitch is 9 millimeters, and this is my thread metering. So the moment you go to different stitches on our Icon 2 and our Icon 1, instead of the regular tension, it is showing the thread metering. So I just wanted to show you this to get started as people are starting to join us. And now I'm going to come back and we're just going to talk about, let's see, now we've got a lot more people joining us. So for most of our machines that are in the market, okay, every machine that's existed for over 150 years has the same type of tension. And that is true of our creative icons and our quilt expressions, the ambition line. They all have one type of tension. But there are many machines that are in the PFAFF lineup that have a secondary type of tension. So when we're on a straight stitch, it will be the same tension that every machine on the market has. If we go to a decorative stitch or embroidery, it switches automatically to active stitch technology. And what you will see on the screen, instead of saying tension, it's going to say that it's thread metering. And I want to explain to you what that means. And I'm actually going to open up our the front of the machine a little bit so that you can see what that looks like and how that works. All right. And they don't recommend that you take that part off, because if you break it, it's a very expensive part. So you don't want to have to deal with doing that. But if you're interested and you would like to know, I would go in and talk to your dealer and they can show you, and then you know how they feel about it. But I'm going to come back to the front of our machine this time. All right. And I'm going to go back to a straight stitch and go back to that menu where it shows you straight stitch. And now down here, you'll see that it shows you tension is active. Anytime you're using a straight stitch or anytime you're using free motion, that is going to be what's active. Now I'm going to come over and show you exactly what happens. I'm going to just move my camera over and get it a little bit closer in here, because I want you to see what we're talking about. So up here in the top of your machine, you'll see on all of our machines, Quilt Expressions, Ambition Line, the Passport, this is regular tension. There's a little guide up here, and then there's two pads right here. And when your foot is in the up position, that is opened. Now, if I put the foot down on a straight stitch, the tension is tight. This whole area is tightened up, and the thread is being held right here. And depending upon whether the thread is looser or tighter, it will have more pressure on the thread. Now, our active stitch technology is down below these two wheels. And let me see if I can zoom in and get even closer for you to see that. All right. So do you see this part right here? These are open. Nothing has changed. This active stitch technology is not on most of our sewing machines. It is really mostly on our Creative Icon 2. The Creative Sensation Pro had active stitch technology also. But most machines just have this tension that's up here at the top. And when your foot is in the down position, and by foot I mean your press-a-foot foot down here, then that is closed. When you put that up, now this is very loose. And that's the reason why it's important for you to lift the press-a-foot up when you're changing your threads, so that the thread can easily come through without being obstructed. Now on my screen, I'm going to select a different stitch. And now instead of it saying tension, it says that active stitch technology is active. And so if I put my press-a-foot down, you'll notice that these two wheels have moved to the right side, and my upper tension, this one that's up here, isn't being used right now. It didn't close at all. When I lift my foot up, now my active stitch technology is active. And there's a very valuable lesson to this, because often when you hear us talk about, and I'll zoom out a little bit here. All right, let me just zoom out. And I'm going to put that part back into place. So I'm just going to move it over here for a second and put it back on. All right, because you can't sew with that piece off. So I put that piece back into place. What's important to realize is that when you are sewing, no matter what machine you have, no matter what brand, when your foot is in the high position, the tension's open. And so that lets the thread sit itself very easily into the guides. But if your foot is down and the tension's closed, you cannot pull that thread out. And that's why sometimes you'll get thread breaking and stuff when you're trying to change your thread color, or maybe you've had a thread breakage and you're rethreading, but you never lift the foot up. Well, the foot needs to be in that higher position so that the tension's open. That's how it all works. No matter what machine, you could go back 150 years. That's the way they all work. So I'm going to come back to show you some of the reasons why you might want to change your tension. All right. Now, let's see. We've got this screen right here. This is a lovely bag, and on it I've got lots of decorative stitching, and I didn't want to use a wash away on top. So what I did was I lowered the tension a little bit, which let out a little bit more thread, and so the thread didn't sink down into the velvet quite so much. And isn't that pretty? Let's see if you get up there close. Aren't they beautiful stitches? And we do have some amazing stitches, and they really do shine. But if I had not lowered my tension, the stitches would have sunk down into the pile of the velvet more, and then you wouldn't have seen them quite so much. I've got a few other examples when I'm going to come back over here to our machine, and we're going to go and look at, all right, let me just get the camera refocused here a little bit. Try not to show you my dirty and messy, not dirty, messy sewing room while I'm at it. All right, so here it's showing you thread metering. And if I went back to a straight stitch, it shows you tension. And these same buttons are on all of our sewing machines and our sewing and embroidery machines. And really, it's a matter of that we don't recognize they're there because they don't have the words tension marked there. I love it on our newer machines how you can see the words so you understand what that is. But as I move back, all right, and I'm going to go back and so you can see the threading over here like this. I want you to pretend that my hand is the tension, all right? And so if I go down in number, I go from 4.6 to 4.2, it's like my hand is holding the thread a little looser. That's all that's happening. And if I go up, it's like my hand is holding the thread a little tighter. Nothing else has changed. I'm not making any physical changes to the machine. I'm not changing anything in the bobbin tension. And automatic tension means that you can change it in any way you want to, and it'll automatically go back the way it was. So let me come back in here. All right, we'll move it up here a little bit more. Sorry about that. All right, and let's go to a kind of stitch where this might make a big difference. All right, I'm going to go to our floating stitches. And one of the stitches that I always will make changes for are these floating stitches. These are beautiful, beautiful stitches. Here's an example of a floating stitch that I did here. All right, and I've got a few more examples that I'll show you. Let me see if I can pull them up. All right, right here, this is an example of some of the floating stitches that we have in many of our machines. And then this is another one on this quilt, okay? So if you're going to do a stitch that's big and open, I'll show you another example. Like this stitch right here, these are floating stitches. They're very loose, and they're big and open. Well, I don't need to really make a change to them. They're great. But when I'm doing a satin stitch, and I really want that stitch to pop, or I'm doing a sewing stitch where I'm sewing two pieces of fabric together and I want it to be able to open up so that I can see the decorative stitch really, really nicely, I usually will do two things. I will increase the density of the stitch and I will lower the tension a little bit so it lets more thread out. So I see Amy's got a question for me. So let's stop for a moment and take a question. Amy?
Somebody wanted to know, does it really help to floss your thread while threading it? I know that's one of your favorites, Karen.
It is my favorite because there's a lot of fallacies out there. And a lot of these fallacies get treated online because often people don't actually know what they're talking about with their machine. The reason that some people were advised to floss their thread, and by that, I'll show you what I mean. I'll go over there, but that it's basically holding it at the top and then rubbing it back and forth and trying to force it into the tension. The reason that rumor started was often people forget to lift their press foot up. And so the tension's closed. So the only way you can guarantee you're going to get your thread into the tension is by forcing it and flossing it back and forth. And really, that's ridiculous, because if your foot is in the higher position, then it's completely open, the pathway, and there's no reason. The way I describe it is, you want to thread firmly. Okay. You don't want to be loosey-goosey. You want to thread nice and firmly. And I'll show you a really good way of threading to make sure that the thread is seated both in the regular tension, and if you have active stitch technology, also in the active stitch technology. And it really is the same thing. You'll probably have seen a lot of things online where people will swear that metal guide where you're bringing the thread down, that metal piece that I showed you that's loose, that it should go to the right of it or it should go to the left of it. And if you have some magical way of doing it one way or the other, it solves all your problems. And again, that's ridiculous, because if you were going to thread for a twin needle, you would have one thread going to the left and one thread going to the right. That's why that's there. And so it really doesn't make a difference whether you thread to the left or the right. It's more important that you thread firmly so the thread gets seated in the tension all the way, and then also coming up onto the take-up arm. Now, many of our older machines, when you come up into the take-up arm, and I'll show you a close-up of that too, they did not have a little clip. And so if you weren't threading firmly, the thread would kind of like pop off that take-up arm. Today, most of our machines have an extra clip on that take-up arm. So if you've threaded firmly and you know you've got it on there, it's not coming out ever, unless you want it to come out. And so they've really listened over the years, and they've made some major changes as we're going to really solve some of those problems. Any other questions, Amy?
That was the only one so far.
All righty. Well, I'm sure we'll get some more interesting questions as we go. And please let me know, because I really want everybody to feel comfortable that they can thread their machine easily, and also that they can adjust the stitches. And when it comes to, like, here's an example. I'll just hold this up like this, okay? This is a garment that I did. It's embroidered on a very sheer, stretchy knit. You can see that stretchy knit, how stretchy it is, right? And when I was embroidering that, I used a black bobbin thread, and I really wanted some of this color to go onto the bottom so that I could see a little bit of color on the other side. So if I turn it upside down, you'll see there's just as much color on the other side. This is the wrong side. And I achieved this by changing the balance. So instead of the thread being set up so that it was coming down a little bit to the lower end underneath, I lowered the tension, which let more top thread out, and it let more of the thread show on the back of it. Now, I wouldn't have been able to achieve this if I was afraid of playing with tension. All right, I'm going to go back to my machine. I'm going to make some changes, and then I'm going to show you how automatic tension really works. And all of our PFAFF machines, from the 620, the Ambition 620 higher, they all have automatic tension. Now, if you don't have automatic tension, like say you have an older machine or you have the Ambition 610, there's a dial. And for every stitch that comes up, it's going to give you a recommended tension. If it was a sewing stitch, like a straight stitch, it's going to say 4 to 6. And if it's more of a decorative stitch, it's going to say probably 2 to 4. And there'll also likely be a recommendation for how heavy your foot is going to be. So these are things that happen even on a mechanical machine. You need to adjust the tension, and you need to adjust the press foot pressure depending upon the material you need that you're using. But what that means is you need to know a lot more to sew with a mechanical machine or a machine that doesn't have automatic tension. If you have automatic tension, you really don't need to think about it too much, because it's automatically going to change the stitch length, the stitch width, the press foot pressure, and the tension. All of those things are kind of adjusted when you're going to select a decorative stitch if you have automatic tension. So let me come back to my machine, and I'm going to choose the satin stitch. All right, let me see this satin stitch right here. That's the one that I selected. All right, and now when I look down here, I'm going to close that window. This is showing me the length of that stitch is 20. My thread metering is 50. Now that all that means is that particular stitch has the right tension selected for it. 50 is kind of like a baseline. It doesn't mean it's the same as every other stitch. It means that is the baseline for that stitch. And I know that that's true because if I turn off active stitch technology, it will show me the tension, and it might say the tension is 2.2. And another stitch, the tension might say 2.6. So thread metering is meaning that's the base level for the stitch that I'm working with. So let me go here and touch this little toggle switch. Right now, that toggle switch is showing me the density. These stitches that are on your creative icon too, they have been set up. In Europe, they use a lot of 35 weight embroidery thread, and they've been used for 60 weight bobbin thread. So if I want this stitch, I mostly use a 40 weight rayon thread. So I'm going to change this density, and I'm going to go down, and it will make the stitch heavier and thicker, more stitches per inch. And if you're not really sure exactly what that'll do, if you go the other way, let's say I go up here and I go, I'm not sure which way I'm going. Can you see that the stitch is getting thinner and thinner? If I keep going, it's going to make it look like a EKG machine because there's so few stitches in there. So that way I know that's not the way I want to go, unless you want to do an EKG stitch, which is actually kind of cool. So when I get back to where I started, this color will go back, and now there's no more orange that's on that number. So it originally was a 3. And if I want to change, I'm going to bring the density down to 1 because I always like to make it as dense as possible. And when I usually do this, I often like to lower my tension so it's going to let more thread out. 35 is probably too much, but I might try it at 45. And then this is my stitch width. If I wanted to change my stitch width, I can do that. Now, automatic tension means the moment you go and choose another stitch or that same stitch, everything is automatically set back the way it is. So I'm going to open up my sewing stitch. I'm going to touch that stitch again. And now everything is reset the way it was in the very beginning. And that is what the definition of automatic tension is. Automatic tension means you can change the stitch in any way you want, and it will automatically go back to the way it was before you touched it when you go to a new stitch or you touch that stitch again. So I'm going to do this stitch without making any changes because I want you to understand why it's important that we know how to use the density button. So let's see. I think we've got some more questions coming.
Somebody would like to know, what stabilizer did you use when you were embroidering that black stretchy fabric?
Okay, so I used Aqua Magic. I always use Aqua Magic when I'm working on this type of stretchy fabric because it's going to not be affected by humidity. And in Vermont, we have a crazy amount of humidity. And many of you across the United States and other countries have a lot of humidity. So, and today is one of those days, I got to tell you. So if I use the plasticky kind of stabilizer, it's usually affected by humidity. And for a large design like this, what'll happen is that the stabilizer actually starts drooping in the hoop. And so there's no way you could possibly get a really well-aligned embroidery design if the stabilizer isn't stable. If it's not, if it's being affected by humidity, then things are not going to line up. And so often when I'm using wash away stabilizer, I'm going to be choosing to use the Aqua Magic that PFAFF sells. And it is an excellent quality and it works really, really well. Now, and we're going to talk more about changing your tension in sewing and embroidery, depending upon what you're doing. But let's see if there's any other questions. I think there's a question about thread weight.
Yes, somebody wanted to know how different thread weights are going to affect how you adjust your tension.
Exactly. That's exactly the kind of way you need to think, right? So we usually, when we're doing decorative stitches, we have a 60 weight thread in our bobbin, which is a very thin thread. And then on the top, we'll usually use a decorative thread that's got a 40 weight. Now, I did an embroidery of a lion, and I was using a heavy, heavy thread that was a 12 weight. It was super thick. Like you could see how thick it was. And I did a little bit of a test with it, and I could see, because the top thread was so heavy, it was coming way down below into the bobbin area, and it was making that stitching underneath so thick. So I couldn't continue. So in that case, because I was using a very thick thread, I needed to put more tension. It's like I had to hold my hand up there tighter. I needed to go up. And so I went from a 50 to a 60 to 60 to a 70. I went all the way up to 85 so that there wasn't so much thread going underneath, and it kind of rebalanced it. It let a little bit of color go below, but it wasn't letting it so be overwhelming. And so that ended up being, for that one thread, very important. And if you are not willing to use your buttons, thread tension and things like that, then that limits you on the kind of thread you can use, because you're probably not going to be very happy. I use every weight of thread, from a very fine 100 weight to the heaviest 12 weight threads, and I can get some absolutely amazing results. But it's because I understand that sometimes when you're using different threads, you're going to need to make a change. All right. I'll show you some more examples too as we are doing it. Any other questions, Amy?
Yes, somebody just popped up wondering if, when you were, again, embroidering that stretchy fabric, you needed to float it, or if you were hooping it normally.
Well, most people would float it, but that's not what I do, because I find when I float things, and most people, what they do when they float things is they tend to lay it on top, and they use the basting, and they tend to stretch it too much. And because this is so stretchable, then you end up, when you take it out of the hoop and you wash the stabilizer, it all shrinks in, and you wonder what happened. And it's because you overstretched the fabric. So I will lay my fabric in the hoop. I use the 360 by 260 hoop to do this. I laid my fabric in the hoop so it was flat, but I didn't stretch it. And then I put the top of the hoop in place. I didn't use a metal hoop. And then guess what? I lowered the tension, because I could see that it was pulling in a little bit and puckering, and I didn't want it to do that. And so by lowering the tension, not only did it stop any puckering, it also was letting me to see more of that color underneath. And this is actually, it's one of my favorite things in the world. I usually wear it. It doesn't look very good right now because I have white underneath it, so you can't see it so well, but it is gorgeous the way that the embroidery just goes like that. And that's actually the wrong side. That's the right side. But you know what? Isn't that amazing that the wrong side and the right side look just as pretty? And so I find what happens is that the more you understand how your machine works, the better quality you're going to get results, and the happier you're going to be. So who doesn't want to be happy, right? And so let me just grab this. I got this back here. This is something that I did. All right. And this was a really fun project to do. These are all designs that you can find on your creative icon too. I used a piece of fabric. I'll show you up close. It was green that had these little silver dots on it. And I'm going to pull up the other camera over here so you can see this maybe a little bit closer up, because I want to show you something that happened. And let's see if I go to this one right here. And all right. Now maybe I'm going to have to hold it up like this a little bit. Okay. So do you see right here? You can see that the outline didn't line up. And when you're doing an embroidery, and you can see that the outline is usually going to be the last stitch. If that doesn't line up, that's not the machine's fault. That's usually what happens if you haven't stabilized your fabric well enough. And so what was happening as this was stitching is, and I had that fabric here, and then I had a layer of organza on top of this. And it's actually kind of amazing how this all worked out. I really, really do love it. And let me see if I can pull that in there a little bit better. Can you see that? All right. So what's happening here is, because I was embroidering and this was a very dense design, I just had a layer of tearaway in there. And what would normally happen was, if it's a very dense design, the fabric tends to pull in. And so then that outline doesn't line up anymore. And that's a solvable solution. You will see, though, online, many people will tell you that if you've got a very dense design, that what you need to do is to add more layers of stabilizer. And I've done some embroidery designs that have had 1.5 million stitches. And what their advice is for every 10 or 15,000 stitches, you need to add another layer of stabilizer. Well, that's a ridiculous advice. First of all, that advice is given by somebody who doesn't know their machine very well. Because imagine if I'm doing a 200,000 stitches in a design in the 360 by 260 hoop. I was going to pull it over, but I'll have it next to me. That would mean that I would need to put, maybe 10 layers of stabilizer in there. That is not logical. Imagine how it's not going to make your quilt feel. Look at this quilt, feels nice and soft, right? And it feels very much like a quilt, and it's stitched very much like a quilt. If you put 10 layers of stabilizer in there, it's going to feel like a log. It's going to be so stiff and so heavy. You wouldn't be able to use it for a garment. You wouldn't be able to use it for anything. And so the reason people tell you advice like that is often it's because they don't know enough about their machine, or they're afraid of making a change in the tension. And that is what we're supposed to do. That's why they put the buttons there. So once I see, and this was something I did many, many years ago, I actually did this poppy design with the Creative Sensation Pro. It's like probably about 15 years old. But these poppy designs and all of these designs are in your Creative Icon 2. They're in also the 950 that's behind me, and they're beautiful. And I love them because you can just play and plunk them down where you want to. And it gives you a really good opportunity to get a sense of, especially you have the Icon 2, you can scan and you can see where your design is going to go. So it's really a cool thing to do. But what I learned all this time way back when was if I was going to see that my fabric was pulling in the hoop or puckering in the hoop, that if I lowered my tension, if that's what you have, or if you lowered the active stitch technology, just one notch, go from 50, and if you don't have active stitch technology, go from 2.8 to 2.6, all of a sudden it's letting out a little more thread and you're not getting the puckering and pulling. And so it solves a lot of the problem without you having to use 20 layers of stabilizer. And so I dare all of you to go home and give it a try, because really, once you realize how easy it is to do this, then when you run into a problem where you're not happy with the results, then you can figure out how to solve it. And we will talk about quilting, because with quilting, it's the opposite. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But let's see, are there any more questions, Amy?
No, you're good to go ahead.
Okay, I'm going back to my machine, and I'm going to do a stitch out and show you this particular stitch. Because with these floating stitches, there's a couple of different ways of using them. You can use them to sew fabric together, but when you look at some of the floating stitches, like these ones here, these are very light stitches. They are very easy to use. I wouldn't make any changes if I'm going to choose this stitch here, because it's not a heavy dense stitch. There's not a lot of satin stitch in it. But if I come back to this one, there's a lot of satin stitch in here, and I'm going to leave the length the same, but I'm going to change the density of it and make it a heavier stitch, because that's the way I like to use it. All right. So I'm going to use my fabric and the foot that I've got on. We'll zoom in, because I want everybody to get the most out of their stitches and be happy. And that can make all the difference in the world. So when you're using these stitches to sew on the middle of the fabric, like I've done here, what you do is you fold the fabric back so the right side is facing in. And I've got the bi-level foot on. And usually if it's a very dense stitch, it says to use stabilizer. And how do I know that? Because when I look up over here, it's showing me that I'm going to be using a different foot. That is the bi-level foot. And then this is the symbol for the IDT. So I'm going to be using the walking foot. And then that's the symbol for stabilizer. All right. And it's showing me that I'm using the bi-level foot. And my press-to-foot pressure is set to 5.5. And the reason I did that is because I went in there earlier into the settings and I changed it. So let me go back to where it is. So when I make a change, this is my list that reminds me I've made a change from what was recommended. Now I don't see that a change is made anymore because I went back to the way that the original setting was. And that's what I love about our newer machines, that it gives us all that information. So we don't even have to remember what we did. We can actually see it. All right. So I'm going to come in here, and the floating stitches, if you're using them like this with the bi-level foot, all right, it's going to start sewing on the stabilizer, and then it will come and do the decorative stitch on the fabric. I'm just going to do 2 of them. And then I'm going to stop. I didn't stop in time, but I'll just stop and cut. Okay, wait a second here. So there is the stitch. Can you see how dense it is? It actually physically tore the tearaway. And when I go to open it up, I've really got to fight with it to open that stitch up. And you can see it almost looks puckered here, right? And that's because the satin stitch is so dense right now, because I changed the density of it, made it fuller and heavier looking, but now it won't open up. Whereas look at the other example that I've done over here. Look at how beautiful that is. And the only thing I did was I went onto my screen and I lowered my tension. I went from 45 and I tried that and it was all right. And then I went down to 40 and it stitched perfectly. And look at the difference in the two. Can you see how nice that is? Compared to what my results are here. It's all puck. Wait a second. I got to get you on the screen here. See how it won't relax. It's coming in too tight. And then here it looks perfectly flat. And all I did was lower my tension. I lowered my density for both of them. And then remember how I said it'll automatically go back the way it is when I touch the stitch. So I'm just going to touch that and it all resets. Automatic tension is an amazing, amazing thing because it will automatically reset everything back the way it is. So I'm just going to double check here. All right, let me come back. Yeah, so Amy, I think you have another question.
Somebody wanted to know if that purple fabric that you're using has any kind of stabilizer or like shape flex or interfacing on
No,
it.
I just used the regular fabric behind there. And that is what I did with all of these that I sewed. They're just 2 pieces of fabric. When I sewed them together with the floating stitches, they didn't have any extra body to them. They were just the fabric by themselves. And so if I had not, maybe if I had wanted to add, Pellon 101 or some extra stabilizer to it, then maybe I wouldn't have had to change the tension, but who wants that extra body when they're sewing a quilt together, right? So if you can be aware that lowering the tension will let more thread out, and you can see right there what a big difference it makes, right? You can see how I have to really work to pull that out, and look at how nice this looks. And that all I did was lower the tension, which let more thread out, and then it allowed the fabric to open up very easily without a problem, without adding any other layers of extra stabilizer. And I mean, think about it. We are all pretty frugal with our stabilizer. Do we really want to add more stabilizer when we don't need it? If we can get away without, doing it, why would we want to spend all that money on extra stabilizer when really the more we know our machine, the happier we can be with what we're doing? Let's see. Any other questions?
Somebody wanted to know if the PFAFF bi-level foot is similar to the Viking left edge top stitch foot.
No. It is very much like the edge joining foot. It's got a bar in the middle, and then it's meant for doing that type of thing. So on the Viking, you would use that the edge joining foot to do the floating stitches. On PFAFF, it comes with your icon 2 with the 950 with the performance icon. It comes with the bi-level foot. And so the left edge is higher a little bit underneath. When you look underneath, there's a little bit of a groove cut into the left side, and there's a bar in the middle. But the one that would compare mostly to that would be the edge joining foot for Viking. Any other questions?
No questions that I can see right now.
All righty. So I'm going to come back in there, and we're going to go, and I'm going to go through threading a little bit more. I'm going to back it up and show you the threading. And then we're going to move to embroidery to talk about some of the things that you can do in embroidery so that you can recognize this. All right. So just going to come back out here, and let me zoom out a little bit. All right. I need to zoom up far enough out, but not so far out that you see my messy sewing room. All right. So when I thread my machine, and no matter what machine you have, okay, it doesn't matter what brand, it doesn't matter what, how old, it could be a mechanical machine. They all work exactly the same. You need to make sure that your foot is up. If your foot is down, that means that the tensions are closed, and the only way you can get the thread out, like right now, here's the thread, right? Look at how tight that is. There's no, I cannot pull that thread because it's so tight. And so people get upset and irritated, and then they'll yank it. And then it ends up being that some of the thread gets caught in the tension. When I lift the foot up, now the thread comes out very easily. See how easy that is? And that's why it's so important when we're threading. Now, many people, especially service people, they recommend that if you're going to cut the thread and change it, that you cut the thread here and pull the thread backwards. And the reason they do that is because so many people have bad habits of trying to pull the thread out when the foot is down, or if they have a mess, like maybe the thread got shredded or something like that, they pull that back up into here, and then all the shredded thread gets caught into the tension guides. And so most service people would recommend you do that you cut the thread here and you pull the end out that way. I know many of you are very frugal, and you're going to do whatever the heck you want when you're at home. So I think it's more important you understand the correct way of threading so that you don't leave extra thread. If for any reason you do have a shredded thread or a problem, then I would do what they're talking about and cut the thread here and pull it out this way very gently. If you're going to take the thread out and pull it all the way up because you don't want to waste thread, then make sure your press foot is up and put it up all the way if you can. That way you're double checking to make sure that it's up. And now when I go to thread, if the press foot is up, I know the tension is open here and active stitch technology is open here. And when I'm threading, okay, this Icon 2 and many of our machines have the telescopic threading that's up here. So I'm going to start by putting the thread up here. And this gives it a much, much better quality stitch control. The telescopic threading there, it kind of lets any metallic threads or different threads go through, and it smooths out the thread, and you get less breakage and less problems with it generally. But right now, and I'm going to see if I can kind of bring this up a little bit more. So when I say thread firmly, this is what I mean. I'm going to hold my thread with my right hand, and this is going to let the thread slide through. But my left hand is doing all the work. All right, my presser foot is up. I'm going to come into, and if you want to see it up here like this, coming in front of that piece. I'm coming here like this and going around the back, okay? So it goes like this. But if I'm not holding onto the thread and I'm just very loosely holding it, the thread isn't set into the tension. I think I've done it right, but it's not going to work. And I'm going to get thread error messages because I didn't firmly seat the thread into my tension, okay? So when I'm threading, I hold firmly. I'm trying to keep my hand out of the way here. And then I come down here and I'm going to thread through the regular tension and also the active stitch technology. And very firmly, I've got lots of tension on the thread. Then I'm coming up here onto the take-up arm. I go straight back and over to the left. And now I'm coming here to the little hook above the needle, and I'll zoom in so you can see this better. All right. Because there is actually a little trick to this. A lot of people find that they struggle getting this hook. On our Icon 2s, the opening of this hook is on the right. And because I threaded it firmly and I've been using my left hand, and also I'm left-handed. That's the reason I discovered this. Most people, what they do is they try and put this thread through that hook and they pull it sideways and it doesn't want to go. And that's because what you should be doing is putting the thread through the hook and pulling it backwards, and it goes right into place with no pressure. All right. And I'm going to do that again. I see people kind of like threading it like this, and they've got all kinds of fancy techniques. But really, all you have to do is catch the thread like this and then pull it to the back, and it goes right into place. And now it's ready for the automatic needle threader. And when I'm using the automatic needle threader, I have to pull that tail away, right? If I leave the tail like this, there's no way in the world that my automatic needle threader can pull all this thread through the needle. And so it looks like it didn't work. I've got to cut that tail away. And then now when I touch my automatic needle threader, which is up here, all right, it's going to thread my needle. Whoops, didn't do a very good job. That's because I probably didn't have it set right. Let's try that again. It was working. No, well, apparently I have a problem that I didn't realize.
That's all right, Karen. We can't see it. You're going to need to bump your camera up. So we never saw anything. You're good.
I put a new needle in there. I might not have put it all the way up. But, well, that's too bad. You didn't see that. But you did see the thread going through the hook, right? Did you see that?
We saw that. Just when you hit the threading button, we missed it.
All right. Now, let's come back over. All right. And I'll zoom out. And let's see how much time we've got left. Is there any other questions, Amy?
Yeah, somebody would like to know, when you were doing those floating stitches, is it active stitch technology or is it tension? Do you turn one on or off?
No. So what happens automatically, all right, when we are sewing, because here you can see the metering, right? This is, and we talked about this a little bit in the beginning, all right? I'm going back to my straight stitch. It tells me that it's tension. Tension is only when we're doing a straight stitch. So when you are seeing a lot of people online saying, well, if you're having a problem with your stitches, your decorative stitches or embroidery, all right, the active stitch technology is on when you're doing decorative stitches or embroidery. But when you're doing a straight stitch, active stitch technology is not on. Do you see it says tension? So when people tell you when you're doing a straight stitch or you're quilting or doing free motion to turn active stitch technology off, it is never, ever, ever active when you're doing a straight stitch. It always is the regular tension that's active. All right. And then when we go to decorative stitches or embroidery, that's when active stitch technology has been activated. So if I touch a different stitch, you'll see it changes to thread metering. That is telling you that's active stitch technology. I hope that's clear. If anybody else has any other questions, I'll come back and do that again. But we are going to go back and we're going to talk a little bit about quilting, because if we look at a straight stitch, all right, here we are in regular sewing, and you'll see that the tension is at 4.6. So when I'm doing quilting or free motion, I don't have to do anything. Regular tension's already been selected. There's nothing I need to do. When I go into embroidery, and I'll show you this on the screen, but when I go into embroidery, I usually will like to recreate the same environment if I'm going to quilt a quilt. Like this is a whole cloth quilt. Okay, some of you have seen this before. That's the back. This is the front. So if I go into embroidery, my active stitch technology is on and the tension is off. And when I have my active stitch technology on, there's very, very little pressure on that thread. All right. It's meant so that the bobbin thread doesn't pull at all. It's going to look very, very flat. And the top thread is going to come down below the surface. It's not a balanced stitch. When I'm in sewing and you look at that screen, you'll see that the tension is 4.6. That means that the top thread and the bottom thread are going to meet at the surface, right? That's a balanced stitch. The top thread is going to come down and the bottom thread is going to come up. And on the back, it's going to look like a perfect stitch because it's balanced between the top, right? And that's at a tension of 4.6. Now, when we go into embroidery and we want to do a whole cloth quilt, or we want to do edge to edge quilting, we do need to think about what we want our quilt to look like. Now, if you're not a perfectionist, don't make any change and you'll be happy. But if you are a perfectionist and you want to have the best look, when we go to embroidery and we're ready to stitch out, I turn off active stitch technology. And then usually it's going to show me that the tension's at 2.8. So imagine how little tension is on the upper thread. And that's, it's always referring to the tension on the upper thread, right? The bobbin is always set. We're never talking about making a change to the bobbin. But when we go in there, and I'll go over on the screen and show you this so you can really get it in, you know, what you're thinking of. But if in sewing, active stitch technology is not on when we are doing a straight stitch or we're selecting free motion quilting, then when we go into embroidery and we want the same balanced look, then what we're going to do is we're going to recreate that same environment. So we're going to turn off active stitch technology and we might increase the tension a little bit. I usually find between 3.4 and 3.6 is the magic place, but every machine's a little bit different. But I know many of you who are on this Facebook Live today, you are often seeing a lot of comments online and a lot of people who are doing free motion quilting, or also they're doing embroidery, quilting and embroidery, where they're going to do edge to edge quilting. And they're not happy because the bobbin tension is very loose, or maybe it looks like it's spidery. And in embroidery, there's a good reason for that, because there's no tension on that upper thread. And if you want to be quilting your quilts in embroidery, you need to recreate the same environment as if you were in sewing. So we're going to switch over. I'm going to go into embroidery and I'll pull up a quilt design. All right. And I'm going to go up here. Wait a second. Let me go up here. If that will bring me to my embroidery screen. And if I pull up a quilt design, I can scroll and I got a whole menu with beautiful, beautiful quilt designs in it. All right. So let's say I want to choose this design. Now it is a single stitch. Now, if it's a double stitch, is less obviously a problem. But when I'm talking about quilt design, I'm especially talking about a single running stitch, just like the basting stitch. You know, when you do the basting stitch in embroidery, how loose that is. It's because it's meant to come out very easily. And that's why they've made the big long stitches so that it'll just come out. It's not meant to have a lot of tension on it. Now, when I go to embroidery, and I can see I've turned off active stitch technology because I was in there quilting the last time I was in here. Normally it's going to be on, and I leave it on whenever I'm doing all of my dense embroidery designs and all of my, you know, beautiful flowers and everything else. But when I want to do a quilt design, I'm going to turn this off. And then when I touch OK, it will tell me to put my hoop on. And right now, I don't see tension anywhere, do I? Where you're going to find the tension is going to be down here where it says stitch out progress. And when you look at it, you will see that it says 2.8. So imagine if you were in sewing and you were doing free motion and you had your tension at 2.8. Can you imagine how loose that stitch would be? And that's why it's important to understand how tension works, because the more you understand, the easier and the better results you're going to get. So I usually, if I'm doing a quilt design like that, I'll bring it up to around 3.4, and then I'll do a test design. Just like if you have a long arm, you normally do a little bit of stitching, and then you would look at the bottom and make sure the bottom looks just as nice as the top. And if that works for you, then you can use that setting every time you're doing a quilt design without having to ever look at it again. It's probably going to be just perfect. But if you find that the bottom still looks very loose, then you might go up to 3.6. You know you've gone too far. Where if your upper thread is breaking, then you can say, okay, I've probably gone too far. But that's, you know, a very easy thing. So if you look at this, right, that is my front. And this is a single stippling stitch. You see how tiny that stippling is? When you look at the back, look at how beautiful the back is. The tension is beautiful for my stippling. But if I hadn't made that change, the back would be looking very, very loose. And I would see top thread coming to the bottom. By making that change and bringing it up somewhere around 3.4 to 3.6, I've changed the balance enough that now the top and bottom threads are meeting in the middle of the fabric. Amy, does anybody have any questions about that?
Just requests that you write a book about this, explaining it.
That is funny. If I was any good at making money, I would have done that a long time ago. I've had a lot of patterns of things people have asked me to do. But so far, I apparently have no skills when it comes to writing books. So who knows what will happen in the future. But you can always write down your questions. And after this is over, I'm going to come back and I'll answer everybody's questions. But when it comes to, like, when you see a lot of the things that I do here, I do a lot of free motion quilting. And whether you're doing free motion quilting on a long arm or you're doing it on our home machines like our Icon 2 or our Performance, our Quilt Expressions, you always would do a little test and look and see that the top and the bottom are both looking as nice and that they're balanced in the middle. And that is very important, whether you're doing free motion or whether you're doing quilting and embroidery with an edge-to-edge quilt design. And so I think the thing is, don't listen to a lot of the people that are online giving bad advice. Okay. First of all, the next time somebody says that when you're doing a straight stitch or you're doing free motion quilting and they tell you to turn off active stitch technology, let them know active stitch technology is never on when we're doing a straight stitch. And it's never on when we're doing free motion quilting. And so that kind of helps you remember that when you go to embroidery, you're going to not have it on either if you're going to do a quilt design. Like, look at this quilt design here. I love this quilt design. It's so pretty. Isn't that gorgeous? And the back of my quilts, they look just as beautiful. And it doesn't really take a lot to, kind of get a feel for it. It's just take some fabric and sacrifice, 20 inches of fabric and do a test embroidery for the very first time and change the tension so you can understand how it works. And the more you do that, it's same thing with decorative stitches. Change the density of a stitch, lower the tension, and it'll let your satin stitches. And I'll show you some examples. I do have some back over here. Let me pull this over here. Like this embroidery, this is all done on one piece of fabric. It usually hangs on the wall behind me, but I decided to take it off and show you up close, right? So this was, again, is done on a black cotton velvet. And I didn't have any wash away stabilizers on top. And I also didn't want to have to worry about washing the velvet because I was worried the velvet wouldn't look very nice after I washed it. So to get this satin stitch looking so beautiful on this design, this is a Moroccan tile design. All I did was I lowered my thread portioning from 50. I went to 45. And that looked pretty good. And then I thought, well, I'll go down again. So I went from 45 to 40. And that looked beautiful. So I did all of this with a tension on 40. So there was no puckering. There was no pulling. And my satin stitch it's got this nice poofy look that you don't get sometimes when you want it to be there. Isn't that gorgeous? And then you've all seen this other pillow. I did the same thing with this. This was another example. And look at how gorgeous those colors. This pillow is like 15 years old. Okay, this is not new. But look at how beautiful the satin stitch looks. And it's because I know whether I'm doing a decorative stitch or whether I'm doing embroidery, that if I lower my tension, remember, it's like the hand holding here, right? It just opens it up a little bit. It's putting less pressure on the thread. So it lets more thread come out. And then you'll get more thread color on the bottom and you'll get a poofier looking satin stitch. So I dare you all, most of you have stayed with me this whole time. I dare you all to go to your embroidery machine today or tomorrow and give it a try. You can rewatch this video anytime you want to. We're coming to an end of our time right now. I'm going to come back to this subject again. But in the meantime, my next Facebook Live is going to be on the My Sonet Creative 8 website. And I'm going to be showing you how to make applique embroidery designs and then send them to the Momento so that Momento will cut them out for you. And we've been doing this summer series. I think Wendy's is coming up. If it's not, I'm not sure. When is Wendy's, Amy? Do you know when Wendy's is?
It is, I believe, next Tuesday.
Yeah, I think it is.
Yes.
Oh, next Tuesday,
Yes.
Wendy's going to be on, and she's going to be showing you how to create appliques with the Mac. So she has a Mac computer, and she's going to be showing you how to create different levels of applique. I've got some beautiful quilts that I have created the applique in digitizing, and one of them is just like pieces that are all kind of like stitched and they don't overlap. But I want to show you how you can create your own appliques that overlap like a real traditional applique quilt design. And then we're going to talk about what you need to do if you want to send those to the electronic cutter, our Memento, and cut them out. So I've got a new example that I'm going to show you. And I've also got some other quilts that I've made where I've made the designs all by themselves, and I sent them to at the time I had a different cutter, but I've got lots of really great designs. So I hope you all can join me. Mine is going to be August 5th, which is 3 weeks from now at 3:00. It's a Tuesday, I believe. And Wendy is going to be next Tuesday. She'll be on a Mac and I'll be doing it on a PC. But I promise you, we've got lots of great things to share with you. And I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope you get a little bit braver with making adjustments to your machine, because remember, automatic tension means you can change it in any way you want, and it will automatically go and reset when you touch a different stitch or you go to a different embroidery. Everything gets put back the way it was. It's temporary changes. So give it a try. I promise you, you will be so happy that you've taken a few moments to see how that all works, because I think you're going to find that you're going to be a lot happier when you understand how to do that. And a lot of the problems, sometimes we get irritated, we're not happy with our results, that the more you play with our tension and our stitch density, the happier you're going to be. And I'm all for all of us being as happy as we possibly can be. So thank you for joining me today. And I'm going to say goodbye to all of you, and I hope you have a wonderful week. Bye.